Her SUV rolled down my dirt road. Her smile was smug, like she owned the land beneath my boots. She thought she could cross my property, thought her title made her untouchable, but she didn't know what I had built in the shadows. She didn't know about the trap waiting for her tires. And when steel and wood snapped around her car, the look on her face was something I'll never forget. Welcome back to HOA Stories, where I share the real battles, the dark comedy, and the twisted games of suburban life. My name's Jack. I'm a ranch owner living on the edge of a subdivision in the Midwest. I raise cattle, I fix fences, and I fight off an HOA that thinks it runs my land. And today, I'll tell you how their president, Karen herself, drove straight into the trap that ended her power trip. Her name was Karen, the president of the HOA, and in her eyes, my ranch was nothing but a stubborn piece of land she couldn't control. I told you who I am. My name's Jack, a rancher at the edge of the subdivision. My life is simple. My cattle graze, my fences stretch for miles, and I keep to myself. But the HOA, they don't like simple. They don't like free. They like control. From the first day I moved in, I noticed their eyes on me, driving by slow, scribbling notes, whispering at meetings I was never invited to. At first I thought, fine, let them watch. But then came the letters. The first letter was folded neat, slipped under my gate. Violation notice. I laughed when I read it. It said my fence was too tall, that the wood I used was not aesthetic for the community. But here's the thing, I wasn't even part of their HOA. My ranch land was separate, grandfathered in long before the subdivision was even built. Still, they acted like I was their new toy, something they could bend, break, or fine until I gave in. I ignored it. Toss toe. He paper into the fire pit that night, but the letters didn't stop, each one sharper, each one nastier. Failure to comply. Legal action will follow. Board decision final. I almost laughed again, but then I saw the signature. Karen, HOA president. Her name looked like it was carved into the page with a knife. Bold, angry, full of power she thought she had over me. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the trees, I was fixing the water line near my barn. That's when I heard it. The crunch of gravel, slow tires rolling where no tires should roll. I looked up, and there she was, her white SUV crawling down my dirt road, headlights glowing against the dust. She didn't even stop, didn't ask permission, she just waved, like she owned the place. And then she was gone, slipping out through the other end like it was hers. I clenched my jaw that night, my boots heavy as I paced the floorboards of my house. This wasn't about fences or wood. This was about pride, control, a game she thought she could win. And I don't play games on my own land. The next week it happened again. I was in the field, pulling weeds by the pond, and there came the SUV. Same smug wave from behind the glass, like I was invisible. Like my land was just another HOA sidewalk she had paved. That's when I knew. She wasn't testing me. She was daring me. She wanted me to fight back. She wanted the show, the drama, the power trip. And if it was drama she wanted, I was about to give her the kind she'd never forget. I started thinking, how do you stop someone who won't respect a line? You build a new one, a stronger one, but a fence wouldn't do. A gate wouldn't scare her. No, I needed something she couldn't laugh at. Something she couldn't drive through with that smug grin still on her face. So I started planning. Sketches on scrap wood. Long nights hammering under lantern light. The sound of nails sinking deep into oak. My neighbors thought I was building another corral, but I wasn't. I was building justice. The trap began as a simple idea. Sharpened posts hidden just enough. Heavy beams waiting for the weight of her tires. Every swing of my hammer felt like a promise. Every cut of the saw was a warning. This wasn't anger anymore. It was patience. It was a lesson written in wood and iron. While I worked, the letters kept coming. The HOA threatened fines, lawyers, even police. But none of it mattered. They were words on paper, and soon, they'd crash into the one thing paper couldn't stop. I remember the night I finished. The moon was high, silver across the pond. I stood on the dirt road, looking at what I had made. It looked like nothing, until you were too close. And by then, it was already too late. The very next morning, like fate itself was on my side, I heard the sound, tires. slow and heavy. Coming down the road again. I stepped onto my porch, leaned against the post, and waited. The SUV appeared, white paint glowing in the sun, and behind the wheel, Karen's smile. That same smile she wore when she waved at me like a trespasser on my own land. But today, that smile was about to die. She rolled forward, steady, confident, like nothing could touch her. And then it happened. The wood snapped, the beams slammed, glass cracked like thunder. Tires squealed and spun, but went nowhere. Her car was caught, pinned, like prey in a hunter's snare. I could see her face through the cracked windshield, eyes wide, mouth open, her hand slamming the horn like someone would save her. But no one came. There was no HOA rulebook here, no fine, no letter, just me, and my trap. And her pride breaking with every second, I walked slow, boots grinding the gravel, each step louder than the last. She screamed something I couldn't hear, probably threats, lawsuits, words she always thought gave her power, but out here, on my land, her words were nothing. When I reached the front of her SUV, I leaned on the wood beam, looked her straight in the eyes. "This is private land," I said, my voice low, calm, steady. "You don't belong here." Her face flushed red, her hands shaking on the wheel. For once, she didn't look like a president. She looked like what she really was, a trespasser who thought power could buy respect. But respect isn't bought here, it's earned. And as she sat trapped in the mess of wood and iron, I couldn't help but smile, because the truth was simple. She asked for war, and war had finally arrived at her doorstep. Would you let her walk away free, or would you teach her a lesson she'd never forget? That question burned in my head the whole night. And when I woke up the next morning, the sound of silence on my road told me one thing. Karen had gone home, but she wasn't finished. By noon, I found out just how far she was willing to go. It started with the sheriff's truck pulling up slow to my gate, a heavy knock on the wood, a polite voice calling out my name. "Jack, you here?" I stepped out, boots heavy in the dirt. The sheriff tipped his hat, eyes scanning the road like he already knew what he'd find. "You know why I'm here," he said. And I did. Karen had wasted no time. She'd called the law, crying trespass, crying damage, painting herself as the victim of her own arrogance. I told him the truth, plain and simple. This is my land. She drove where she had no right, and my property stopped her car, not me. He scratched his chin, nodded slow, and after a long pause, he said the words I was waiting for. "You're not in violation." She was. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment, because if I knew Karen, the law not being on her side wouldn't stop her. It would only make her angrier. Sure enough, 2 days later the letters came again, but these weren't simplest. E-notices slipped under my gate. These were thick envelopes, stamped official, full of legal words twisted into threats. Reparations due. Unsafe property hazards. Community disruption. I read them all under the glow of my kitchen light, the paper shaking slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from the weight of how far she'd take this petty war. She wanted me gone, or broken, or both. I laughed, tossed the letters onto the pile already growing by my fireplace, because here's the truth. You can write all the rules you want, but out here, paper doesn't scare wood and steel. Still, Karen didn't fight alone. The neighbors began to turn their eyes my way. Mrs. Collins across the street, her lips tight, whispering over her hedge. Mr. Benson with his perfect lawn, shaking his head every time he drove past my gate. And the worst were the board members, Karen's little soldiers. They walked in packs, measuring tape in hand, clipboards filled with rules that didn't even apply to me. I could feel the pressure building, the whole neighborhood watching like a theater crowd waiting for the next act. They wanted me to fail. They wanted the show to end with Karen victorious, but I wasn't about to give them that ending. One afternoon, as I rode my horse along the fence line, I saw Karen again. This time she wasn't in her SUV. She was standing by the cul-de-sac with 2 board members at her side. Pointing toward my land like generals planning a battle, I slowed my horse, tipped my hat. Her eyes burned holes into me, and I knew. The war wasn't just about my road anymore. It was about breaking me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cicadas sang in the dark. The pond glistened under moonlight, but my mind raced. How far would she go? What would she do next? And more importantly, how much was I willing to fight the next morning? I got my answer. Karen didn't send letters this time. She came herself. Her SUV rolled up to the edge of my trap. Not over it, not through it, just close enough to show me she was bold enough to stand on the line. She stepped out, heels clicking on the gravel, her red blazer catching the sun like fire. "Jack," she called out, her voice sharp but sweet, like poison honey. "You've made a mistake." I leaned on the porch rail, didn't say a word. She walked closer, her heels sinking into the dirt, her smile thin as a knife. "The board voted. We've decided your ranch is now under review for community compliance." I chuckled, low, dark, letting it hang in the air. "I'm not in your community, Karen. You know that." Her eyes narrowed, her lips curled. "You will be, one way or another." And just like that, she turned on her heel and drove off. But her words hung heavy, thicker than smoke that week. The retaliation grew bolder. Neighbors left anonymous notes on my gate. "Sell now. Get out. HOA wins." Trash bags were tossed onto my road. Beer bottles smashed near my fence posts. It wasn't just Karen anymore. It was the whole machine moving against me. But here's the irony. The harder they pushed, the calmer I became. Because every act of theirs only proved one thing. They feared me, not because I was violent, but because I was free. And freedom, in a world built on rules and control, is the one thing they can't stand. So I kept working. I mended fences, rode my horse, fed my cattle, and every time Karen drove by slow, staring through her tinted glass, I smiled, because I knew the trap wasn't just wood and iron anymore. The trap was me, standing tall, refusing to bend, and every day she failed to break me. She fell further into it. But I'll tell you this, the night everything came to a head was one I'll never forget. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Whispers spread across the cul-de-sac, neighbors gathering like moths to a flame. Karen stood tall at the front, her blazer brighter than ever. Her voice sharp, filled with venom. She talked about me, my land, my threat to the community. She painted me as the villain, the outlaw, the danger that had to be removed, and the crowd ate it up. But when I walked in, boots echoing against the floor, silence fell, all eyes on me. The outsider, the rancher who wouldn't bow. I tipped my hat, met Karen's stare, and for a long moment, no one breathed, because deep down, they all knew the truth. Rules are easy to write, power is easy to fake, but respect, real respect, comes only when you stand and don't break, and I hadn't broken yet. The room was quiet, every eye burning into me, and in the middle of it all, Karen stood tall, her red blazer glowing under the lights like a warning flag. She smirked when she saw me, like she'd been waiting for this moment, like the whole circus of neighbors and board members was nothing more than her stage, and I was the villain entering on cue. "Jack," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence. "You've put this community in danger. Your reckless behavior has caused damage, and the board is ready to take legal action." I let her words hang in the air. Didn't answer right away, because silence, real silence, has more weight than shouting ever could. Finally, I spoke, slow, calm, steady. "This isn't your community, Karen. It's my land, my road, my rules." Gasps rippled through the room. Whispers rose like snakes in the grass. Karen's smile widened, but it wasn't joy, it was hunger. She thrived on this, on the eyes watching her, on the fear she could stir, but what she didn't realize was that I wasn't afraid. She started listing fines, violations, legal terms I'd never heard before. The board members nodded like puppets. The crowd murmured like a choir. But all I saw was a woman obsessed, a woman so desperate for control. She'd burn her own house down just to keep the ashes in her hands. When the meeting ended, Karen walked past me, close enough that her perfume cut through the air. She leaned in, whispered words only I could hear. "You will lose." Then she was gone. heels clicking sharp against the floor, and just like that, the crowd followed her out, leaving me standing alone. I walked home that night under a sky heavy with stars, the cicadas buzzing loud, the pond glowing pale under the moon, but inside my chest, the silence was heavier than the night itself, because I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the opening act, the very next morning. It began, not with letters, not with meetings, but with war. Karen started her campaign. She called county inspectors, claimed my barn was unsafe. She called the zoning office, said my fences violated code. She even tried to get the fire department involved, saying my brush piles were a hazard. Every day another knock at my gate, another stranger in uniform asking questions, and every time, I showed them the truth. I was legal. My land was protected. My rights were mine. But still, the constant harassment wore heavy, not because I feared losing, but because I knew how deep her obsession ran. Karen wasn't just fighting rules, she was fighting me. And when someone fights a man instead of a law, it stops being business. It becomes personal. The neighbors joined in. One morning I found my mailbox smashed, tire tracks leading off into the cul-de-sac. Another day I woke to spray paint on my gate. HOA rules in sloppy letters. And through it all, I knew exactly who was behind it. Not the hands, but the voice whispering in their ears. Karen. But here's the irony. The more they pushed, the stronger I stood. I fixed the mailbox, painted over the gate, cleaned the mess, because if they wanted me angry, they'd never get it. My calm was my weapon, and it drove them mad. Weeks passed. Tension grew, and one night, the game changed. It was late, the air thick with summer heat. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the fireflies dance over the pond. That's when I saw it. Headlights at the edge of the road, engine idling low, not moving, just watching. I stood, squinting through the dark, and there she was, Karen, her SUV parked just beyond the trap, her silhouette visible in the glow of the dashboard. She didn't move, didn't drive in, just sat there, staring, waiting. Minutes felt like hours, and finally, she rolled down her window, her voice carried across the night air. Sharp, cold. "This isn't over, Jack." Then she was gone, tires kicking dust into the air, leaving silence heavier than before. I sat back down, but sleep never came that night, because I realized something chilling. This wasn't about laws anymore. This wasn't even about land. It was about me versus her. And Karen didn't care what it cost. As long as she won, the next morning I decided I wouldn't wait for her to strike again if she wanted war. I'd give her a battlefield she couldn't control, so I gathered every letter, every notice, every threat she'd ever sent. I stacked them high on my table, pages thick with arrogance and ink, and I began planning my counterattack. Not with fists, not with fire, but with something far sharper, compliance. If she wanted rules, I'd give her rules. If she wanted control, I'd bury her in the very laws she worshipped. I started small, measuring every fence post, every inch of wood, making sure it aligned perfectly with county code. Then I moved on, filing complaints of my own, noise violations, improper landscaping, unapproved lawn ornaments, every little thing the HOA ignored in their own yards. I documented it all, and one by one, I filed them to the county, to the city, even to the HOA itself, because the truth is, when you live by rules, you die by them too. Karen didn't see it coming. At the next board meeting, complaints rained down like a storm. Not about me, but about them, and for the first time, Karen's smile cracked. Her voice shook as she tried to defend herself. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, and I sat in the back, arms crossed, watching the queen lose her crown. But here's the thing about power. It doesn't die easy. Karen fought harder, louder, meaner, and the more desperate she grew, the more dangerous she became. One night I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside my window. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped onto the porch, and there, in the distance, I saw her SUV again, parked silent, engine off, lights dark, watching, always watching. That's when I realized This wasn't just HOA business anymore. It was obsession. It was personal war. And in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. The fight between me and Karen was only just beginning. She thought she could scare me with shadows, parking on the edge of my land, watching me in the dark. But the truth is, it wasn't fear I felt. It was fire. Every time I saw her headlights, every time I heard the slow roll of her tires, I didn't see power, I saw weakness. Obsession is weakness, and Karen was drowning in it. Still, the pressure didn't stop. The HOA board doubled down. Letters grew thicker, fines larger, every envelope stamped in red ink. Words sharp as knives: unsafe structure, danger to residents, pending legal review. They wanted to bury me under paper, but you can't bury a man who lives on dirt. One morning, I walked out to find a county inspector waiting at my gate, clipboard in hand, pen sharp as a sword. Karen stood in the distance, arms crossed, watching like a queen checking her troops. The inspector cleared his throat, asked questions about my barn, my fences, my well. I answered calm, honest, showing him the paperwork I'd kept for years, and in the end, he found nothing, not one thing. Wrong. Karen's face turned pale, her lips tight, but she didn't stop watching me as she drove off. That night, I sat by the fire in my cabin, flames licking the wood, the sound of crickets loud in the air, and I realized something important. Karen wasn't fighting for rules anymore. She was fighting for pride, and pride is more dangerous than any law. Days passed, then weeks, but the tension never eased. Neighbors stopped waving. Some even crossed the street when they saw me coming. Their smiles fake, their whispers sharp. I could feel their judgment pressing down. Not because I'd done wrong, but because Karen told them I had. One evening, I was fixing the water trough by the corral when I heard voices by the fence. Two neighbors talking low. "He'll give in soon. Nobody fights the HOA forever." The other one laughed. "Karen always wins." I gripped the wrench in my hand, teeth tight, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because soon enough, they'd see who really wins. The real breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. The sun was high, the air heavy. I'd just finished mending a post when I saw it, her SUV again, rolling slow. But this time, she didn't stop at the trap. She pushed closer, inch by inch. Daring me, I stepped into the road, raised my hand. "Turn around, Karen." She leaned out the window, sunglasses glinting, her smile cold as steel. "You don't get to tell me where I can drive, Jack." My fists clenched, heat rising through my chest. "This is private land," I said, each word slow, heavy, but she only laughed. "You think you're bigger than the HOA, but you're just one man." And then she drove off, dust rising behind her tires, her laugh echoing in the air. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch with my rifle across my lap, not aiming, not hunting, just watching, because I knew the game had changed. She wasn't just testing me anymore. She was provoking me, pushing me to strike first so she could paint me as the Yikakit monster she already told everyone I was, and that's when I made a choice. If she wanted war, I'd fight it my way, silent, patient, with every ounce of irony the universe had to give. The next morning, I filed more complaints. Not against her SUV, not against her trespassing, but against her own house. Her porch light too bright, her fence 1 inch too high, her mailbox chipped at the corner, every petty thing she had ever fined someone else for. I wrote it down and sent it in. It was revenge by compliance. And it worked. Within days, inspectors showed up at her door, her perfect lawn measured, her mailbox photographed, her fence tagged for review, the look on her face when she saw the papers taped to her door. It was worth every nail I'd ever hammered into wood, but Karen wasn't the type to take defeat in silence. Oh no, she came roaring back. Late one evening, I was feeding the horses when I smelled it. Smoke. I ran toward the gate, heart pounding, and there it was, a trash bag lit on fire. Tossed against my fence, the flames licked high, but I stamped them out before they spread. I knew whose hands didn't throw it, but I knew whose voice ordered it. Karen. That night I stared at the blackened wood, my jaw tight, my fists trembling. She wasn't just trespassing now. She wasn't just filing complaints. She was crossing into war crimes of her own, and I'll tell you this. When someone pushes that far, there's only one way it ends. The very next day, I rebuilt the trap, stronger, sharper, hidden deeper under the dirt. This wasn't a warning anymore. This was the final lesson, because I knew. It was only a matter of time before her pride drove her right into it again. And sure enough, fate didn't wait long. 2 nights later, I heard the engine, slow at first, then faster, her SUV rolling down my road under the moonlight, headlights glowing, tires humming. Her arrogance heavy in the air, I stepped out of the cabin, boots crunching on gravel, eyes fixed on the road, and then it happened. The crack of wood, the slam of metal, the scream of tires, her SUV jerked forward, then stopped cold, caught, trapped. Just like before, I could see her inside, fists pounding the wheel, eyes wild. She screamed, words I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to because the look on her face said it all. She was broken. I walked slow, steady, each step echoing in the night air. She glared at me through the shattered glass, her pride bleeding through every crack. "You'll pay for this," she yelled, her voice raw, desperate. I leaned on the post, calm as ever. "No, Karen. This time you will." And in that moment, under the pale moon, the whole war came down to this. One woman trapped in her own arrogance, and one man standing tall on his land. The night air was heavy, still, silent except for the hiss of her engine stuck against wood and iron. Karen's SUV rocked as she slammed the gear, tires spinning in place. But she wasn't going anywhere. I stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, boots planted in my dirt, her eyes locked on me through the cracked glass. Red with rage, her lips curled into a snarl, teeth bared like a cornered animal. "You'll regret this, Jack," she screamed, her voice sharp enough to cut through the night. "You think you can humiliate me? You think you can stop me? The HOA will bury you." I didn't flinch, didn't even blink. I let her words fall flat against the air. Because out here, on this road, the HOA had no power. Only I did. "You're trespassing again, Karen," I said slow, calm. Her fists pounded the steering wheel. Her horn blared, but the trap held her tight. Every second she sat there, her pride drained like water from a cracked bucket. I leaned closer to the broken glass, my voice low, steady. "Tell me, Karen, was it worth it? Was your power trip worth driving into the same trap twice?" Her face flushed deep red. She sputtered, but no words came because she knew the truth. She was caught. Again, the sound of neighbors broke the silence. Voices carried down the cul-de-sac, doors opening, footsteps rushing, one by one they gathered, flashlights glowing, whispers rising into the night, and when they saw her SUV, pinned, trapped, broken in the same place again, gasps echoed like thunder, phones came out, flashes lit the night. The queen of the HOA, the untouchable president, was now a spectacle. Karen screamed at them, waving her hands wildly. "Stop filming! This is illegal! He's attacking me!" But no one listened. They weren't protecting her anymore. They were watching, like a crowd at a play. And she was the fool on the stage. The irony hit me hard. For months she had turned them against me, whispered lies, painted me as the villain. But now, she was the one exposed, and nothing I could say or do could match the humiliation she gave herself. The sheriff arrived not long after, lights flashing red and blue against the trees. He stepped out, rubbed his temples like he already knew what happened. "Karen, again?" he muttered, almost laughing. She shouted at him, demanded my arrest, demanded justice, but the sheriff shook his head slow. "Steady. You drove where you weren't supposed to. You ignored warnings. This is on you." Her face fell. The crowd murmured, and I swear I saw something break inside her. Because Karen wasn't just angry anymore, she was humiliated. The sheriff ordered a tow truck. Neighbors whispered louder. Some even laughed under their breath, and I stood there, calm, silent, letting the scene play itself out. When the tow truck pulled her SUV free, the damage was clear. Front bumper gone, windshield cracked, tires shredded, her pride wrecked worse than her car. She drove off that night with Terra. He crowd watching, her head low, her power gone, and for the first time, the neighborhood wasn't laughing at me. They were laughing at her. But Karen wasn't done. No, humiliation doesn't kill pride. It feeds it, twists it, turns it darker. The very next week, I got the thickest envelope yet, pages and pages of legal threats. Stamped official, full of words meant to scare me. Community lawsuit, unsafe structures, public endangerment. I sat at my table, flipping through the papers, and I laughed, because the more she fought, the more obvious it became this wasn't about rules. It wasn't even about land. It was about obsession, and obsession always destroys itself. Still, I didn't let my guard down. I rebuilt the trap stronger, reinforced the beams, sharpened the posts, not because I wanted her back, but because I knew she couldn't resist. Pride is predictable, and Karen's pride was a compass that always pointed to her own downfall. The neighbors started changing too. Some whispered apologies at the grocery store. Others stopped sending notes, stopped crossing the street to avoid me, because now they'd seen who the real tyrant was, and once the curtain is pulled back, the play is over. But Karen didn't see it that way. She doubled down at every turn. More letters, more late-night drives, more empty threats that carried less weight every day. One night, I found another note pinned to my gate, written in her sharp, angry hand. "You haven't won. This community belongs to me, and you will regret standing in my way." I stared at the words, smiled, and tossed the paper into the fire pit, because deep down, I knew Karen had already lost. And yet, part of me wanted to see how far she'd fall, how deep her obsession would drag her before she broke completely. Would she keep driving down my road? Would she risk her car a third time? Would she risk her pride again in front of everyone? I didn't know the answer then, but I do know this. Some people can't be saved from themselves, and Karen was one. Of them, Karen's pride should have died that night, when the whole neighborhood saw her trapped, when the sheriff shook his head, when the crowd laughed instead of cheered. But pride is a strange thing. It doesn't vanish when it's crushed. It grows sharper, hungrier, more dangerous. The very next week, she came back louder than ever. Flyers stapled to mailboxes, newsletters slipped under doors, all with the same headline: "Protect our community. Stop the ranch threat." My name printed bold on every page, my land painted as a danger, my trap described as a weapon, my cattle described as health risks. She twisted everything, bent reality until her lies sounded like truth, and some people still believed her. At the next HOA meeting, her voice rang louder than ever. She shouted about lawless ranchers, she warned of unsafe neighbors, and she promised the board would restore order. But I noticed something new. The room wasn't full anymore. The same neighbors who once nodded at her words now stared at the floor. Some didn't show up at all. The cracks were forming. I sat in the back, silent as always, letting her spin her tale. But when her eyes landed on me, when she saw my calm, her smile wavered, because she knew control only works if people believe in it. And little by little, they were stopping, still. Karen wasn't finished. The very next day, I heard the roar of engines outside my gate, 2 tow trucks, 2 code enforcement vehicles, and Karen's SUV leading the charge. She marched out first, papers in hand, lips tight as steel. "Jack," she said, loud enough for the men behind her to hear, "today we're removing your illegal structure." I looked at the men, tired faces, pens ready, and I handed them my paperwork, county approvals, grandfathered land deeds, every legal document I had stacked neatly in a folder. They read in. Silence. Karen tapped her foot, her face redder by the second. Finally, one of them looked up, cleared his throat. "He's in the clear. Nothing here we can touch." Karen's jaw dropped. Her hands shook. "You don't understand. This is dangerous. This is a weapon." The inspector shook his head slow. "It's on his land. He's not part of your HOA. It's legal." The men packed up. The trucks rolled away. And for the first time, Karen was left standing alone at my gate, her face pale, her power gone. I tipped my hat, smiled, and turned back toward the barn, because there was nothing more to say. But deep down, I knew her silence wasn't surrender. It was the quiet before the storm, That night I sat on the porch, moon high, cicadas loud, and I thought about everything. The letters, the threats, the SUV caught in the trap twice, the neighborhood turning, and Karen's eyes every time she looked at me. Not with anger, but with obsession. It wasn't just about land anymore. It wasn't even about the HOA. It was personal. She wanted me gone, not because of rules, but because I didn't bend. And people like Karen can't stand a man who doesn't bend. The days that followed proved it. She didn't slow down. She doubled her efforts, late-night phone calls to county offices, new newsletters accusing me of crimes I didn't commit, even a rumor that I was dangerous with firearms. Spread through the cul-de-sac like wildfire, neighbors grew nervous. Some avoided me completely. Others whispered apologies when no one was looking. And I realized Karen was losing her army. But a desperate queen is more dangerous than a whole board of loyal soldiers. One night, around midnight, I heard the sound again. Engines, but not just one. 3. Headlights cut across my land. Beams of light weaving between the trees. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped into the yard, heart pounding steady. And there she was, Karen's SUV in the lead, followed by 2 others. They didn't stop at the trap. They didn't even slow, because this time they were looking for more than intimidation. I shouted, my voice echoing across the dark. "Turn around, you're trespassing." But the engines roared louder, closer. Dust filled the air, lights blinding against the night. For a moment, I thought they'd crash through my barn itself, but just before they reached the corral, the first SUV slammed on the brakes. Karen jumped out, hair wild, eyes blazing with fury. "You don't belong here, Jack," she screamed, her voice cracking. "This land isn't yours. This whole community is mine." The words froze me in place, not because I feared them, but because I finally understood. She didn't care about rules anymore. She didn't even care about winning. She just couldn't accept losing. I stepped forward, boots heavy in the dirt. "This land was mine before you ever stepped foot here, Karen," I said, calm, steady, "and it'll be mine long after you're gone." Her fists shook at her sides, her face twisted with rage. She turned back to the men in the other cars, waving her hands wildly. "Do something! Don't just stand there!" But they didn't move. They looked at her, then at me, and I saw the doubt in their eyes. Even her allies were breaking. Finally, they drove off, leaving Karen standing alone in the dust, her SUV idling behind her, her pride burning hotter than the engine itself. She stared at me one last time, eyes full of hate, lips trembling with words she couldn't speak. Then she turned, climbed back into her car, and sped off into the night. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt before, because I knew this wasn't her end. This was her unraveling, and unraveling people don't fade quietly, they explode. The very next morning, I found another letter on my gate, not typed, not stamped, handwritten in Karen's sharp, furious scrawl. "You may think you've won, but this war isn't over. I will destroy everything you own." I read the words, let them sink in, and then I burned the paper to ash, because I understood something deeper now. This war wasn't about traps. It wasn't about fences. It wasn't even about me anymore. It was about Karen fighting her own pride, her own fear, her own reflection in the mirror, and that's a battle no one wins. Still, I couldn't shake the question echoing in my mind. How far would she go? Would she risk her freedom, her position, her whole life, just to prove she was right? And maybe the bigger question was this: how far would I go to stop her? Karen's threats lingered in my head, like storm clouds waiting to break. "You may think you've won, but this war isn't over. I will destroy everything you own." I burned her note that morning, but the fire didn't burn away the truth. She wasn't finished. She couldn't be. Pride never dies easy, and hers was clawing for air. For days after, the road stayed quiet. No SUV headlights, no inspectors, no late-night knocks on my gate. The silence should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. It felt like the still air before a tornado. I kept working the land, fixing fence posts, tending cattle, riding the horse trails by the pond. Every sound made me turn my head. Every shadow felt heavier than it should, because I knew Karen was out there, And she wasn't done. Then came the meeting, not at my ranch, but in the subdivision hall, the same place where she'd once stood tall, commanding the crowd. This time, it wasn't the same. I walked in late, boots echoing against the floor. The room was full, but the mood was different. No whispers about me, no nods in her favor. The air was thick, uneasy. Karen stood at the front, red blazer sharp, hair pulled tight. But her smile, it was gone. Her eyes darted across the crowd, desperate, searching for loyalty she no longer had. She slammed papers onto the podium, her voice rising. "This man is a danger. He's reckless. He's tearing this community apart." But the words didn't land. The room didn't roar. In agreement like before, they sat quiet, eyes shifting, some shaking their heads. Mr. Benson spoke first. "The man with the perfect lawn. Karen," he said, his voice low but steady. "We've watched you for months, and maybe it isn't Jack that's the danger. Maybe it's you." Murmurs rippled across the crowd. Karen's face froze, her mouth open but no sound came. Mrs. Collins added next. "We joined this HOA to keep peace, not to watch you wage war on a neighbor who isn't even part of it." And just like that, the tide turned. The board she thought she controlled, the neighbors she thought she commanded. One by one, they began to pull away. Her allies shifted in their seats, some refusing to meet her eyes. The silence she once ruled with fear was now fear of her. I stood in the back, arms crossed, silent. I didn't need to speak. The truth was speaking for me. Karen's hands trembled as she gripped the podium, her voice shrill now. "You're making a mistake. You're letting him win. He'll ruin everything." But no one listened, because they'd seen her SUV trapped twice. They'd seen her lies unravel, and they were done. The vote came fast, one motion, 1 second. The board moves to remove Karen as president, effective immediately. Her jaw dropped. Her hands slammed the wood. She shouted, screamed, begged, but the gavel fell, and her reign was over. The crowd clapped, not loud, not roaring, but steady, like rain after drought, and I walked out. Slow, boots heavy, heart lighter than it had been in months. But Karen's story didn't end there. No, people like her don't just vanish, they burn. The weeks that followed were quiet at first. The new board took over. Calmer voices, fewer letters, fewer eyes watching my ranch. But Karen, she was different. Her SUV still appeared sometimes, parked at the edge of the road. Engine idly. Headlights dim, not every night, but enough to remind me she was still watching. Then one morning, news spread, Karen's SUV had been found in a ditch 2 towns over. Bumper gone, windshield cracked, engine smoking. She'd crashed it, late at night. After leaving another community meeting, she tried to start in a neighbor's garage. No one was hurt, but the SUV was totaled, and with it, her pride finally collapsed. I never saw her again after that. Some say she moved away. Others whispered she was forced out. All I know is that the subdivision grew quieter, calmer, freer. The new board didn't bother me. The neighbors stopped glaring, and my ranch stood tall, untouched, mine as it always was. Sometimes at night I sit on the porch, sipping coffee, watching the fireflies by the pond, and I think about Karen, about her pride, her obsession, her war. And I realize something strange. She wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting herself, and that's a battle no one wins. But I'll never forget the sight of her face, trapped in that SUV, her power shattered, her pride bleeding out in front of everyone. It was the moment everything turned, the moment the whole neighborhood saw the truth. And maybe that's the lesson in all this. When pride turns into obsession, when control turns into madness, it doesn't just destroy others, it destroys the one who holds it. Now tell me this, if you had a neighbor like Karen, someone who wouldn't stop, someone who twisted rules, spread lies, and fought you until their own life fell apart, would you fight them to the bitter end, or would you let them destroy themselves and watch from the porch as their empire turned to dust?